So hey everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Fight Chat Friday from TKD Coach Academy. This week we're just about set to head off to the AETF European Championships, and we're going to look ahead to that a little bit, looking at some of the proposals that are going forward by candidates for the AETF Board of Directors around the European Championships, the European Cup and the future of European competition. We're also going to have a look at some proposed rule changes for ITF that will affect all of us in relation to the competition rules. So if you'd like to stay with us for this chat, it should be a good one.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Fight Chat Friday. So yeah, a discussion topic for this episode. So we're going to have a look at a couple of topics. So we're going to look at the frequency of Euros. So right now it's once a year, so we'll have a look at that. We'll have a look at potential ranking events for European events that happen in that season. So again, the frequency kind of will impact on that, so we'll have a chat through that. The role of the European Cup, and also some potential changes for different categories and some potential changes for special and power. So that's the plan today. We only had a chat in our last episode about some ideas you had, Adrian, in the Irish Cup review for the Irish Cup, or for the special technique and power changes. So we'll maybe bring those up again for anybody who missed it in that last chat.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about some of those, and you know, there are some changes that people have been pushing for or asking for quite a long time, and there was stuff that was highlighted in the coaches survey last year that, you know, the tournament umpire and IT committees have looked to incorporate some of the feedback and some of their own ideas, of course, into a proposal for some new rules for the World Championships, World Cup. But again, this stuff is very much at the draft stage. It has to get through a few layers, but really just want to talk about the ideas behind some of the proposals, and again, you know, regardless of where they came from, how these things might affect, you know, our ITF tournament competition going forwards. But before jumping into that, maybe we'll have a look at a few of the things that have been proposed, not as immediate action things, but they're in the manifestos as such of some of the people going forward for the AETF Board of Directors. So full disclosure, I'm stepping forward, and you know, I have the backing of the ITA Board of Directors here in Ireland to go forward for the AETF Board. One of, I think, 12 candidates looking for 6 positions on the as regular members of the board, as well as 2 candidates for vice president, 2 candidates for president. So on an 8-person board. But what's really interesting is when people put out their ideas and what they would like to see happening, you know, it gets really interesting to see, well, what direction could this go? And one of the things that has come up, you know, from a couple of people is certainly this idea of the frequency of the European Championships. And as you said, Richie, every year it's a once-a-year event, and it's really a big highlight of the year every year. So myself, and I have to give credit to some other people as well who quite like the idea. Master Mayor has mentioned this as well. The idea of moving the European Championships to an every second year idea. So, your thoughts, pros and cons, off the top of your head.
So, coming from that, as I see it straight off the bat, I think, it gives a little bit more of a structure to us in Europe, because we have that every second year, then Worlds, Euros.
Yeah, there's a double peak.
But I do think that it is a major advantage that we have in Europe, having such a big event like the European Championships when we go to world events. So there's that side of it. Then you've also got the idea of, most of the time, the European Cup is almost like a second tier event, and it's not something people focus on. Now, I know a lot has to do with that, with the time of year as well. It's usually at a time where people aren't in their peak of their training. Sometimes in the summer, sometimes it's kind of just at that stage when we're just back to training. So that has an impact for sure. But yeah, I think that the idea is strong if you're going looking at it as to increase other events. So what's the kind of the premise behind all this from your point of view?
Yeah, so it's something that we can talk about, and we have a few other kind of headlines as we go through this. And like, for me, it's a proposal that can't be taken as a solo proposal. So just changing the European Championships to every second year, there's a few reasons why I don't think that would work for the AETF just as a solo proposal. Number one, the AETF, I think, gets most of its revenue from the European Championships itself. the European Cup would be a secondary one, but typically a much lesser one. And then the membership of the countries themselves. So every year there'd be a membership fee paid by the countries. The reason to move the European Championships to every second year from a competitive calendar point of view is that there's a need to peak for the European Championships and need to peak for the World Championships. These are often, they're the pinnacle events for national teams, and they're also the biggest investment of funding for an awful lot of national associations, and even in terms of countries that get direct government support or funding, it's the European and World Championships that they get the funding for. So a reason to move to every second year is you can have a peak event for the national team every single year, but it's not 2 in 1 year, 1 in the next. And in terms of budget allocation, funding, and all the rest of it, it's a little more streamlined to manage that. And I think what you'd see the same strength of teams year on year for both. Where what we've always found in Ireland is you have a double year and one of the two tournaments suffers, and then you have a European Championships only year. And as long as we don't have too many athletes doing state exams, it usually is a very big team and it's very busy. So we have these highs and lows of the national team as you're trying to struggle to get people to peak multiple times for, and then also it's the financial outlay. Because while we were talking earlier about organisationally, like you've experienced this as a competitor, so have I, where, okay, well, you need to find 14 or 1500 euros for this campaign, and now you have to find it again later in the year for the next campaign, as well as trying to get to other international opens and so on. So in a double year, it can get very, very costly.
Okay, yeah.
But that's the first part of it.
When that's what I was just going to say. What is your kind of like double whammy here with this idea?
So that's where we get into the role of the European Cup. And again, a couple of people have looked at how do we go about strengthening the European Cup, because it's one that's it's a great idea. We've been attending since Brighton in, I want to say 2005. Well, it was Brighton. And, the first one was a bit of a slow starter. There was, a very slow one in Tampere in Finland after that. You've had some big ones like Poland and Russia where the home nations were able to support them in full. But the struggle that the European Cup has is it's trying to fit into a busy calendar, often in the same year, like next year, where there's a European Championships, a European Cup and a World Cup all in the same year within 6 months. And that's a real ask for people to be able to support in full. Now, notionally, it's different people, who are going to be the competitors. I think the problem is that it's the same coaches and the same umpires who need to be making all these trips. So I think that's a big challenge. And I think if you refocus on having a European Cup in a World Championships year and a European Championships in a World Cup year, if we line it that way, you've got 2 big championships every year then. And I mean really big. I think the European Cup could be looking at 2,000 competitors, honestly, if it was sitting on its own in a fixed space in the calendar that people could plan around years in advance. Like, I do think you could get to a point where the likes of Ireland could be sending 150 and 200 people to a European Cup on a regular basis if they knew that was going to sit in this spot in the calendar every second year. Because we've certainly seen it with the World Cups. In a European-based World Cup, Ireland have 150 to 200 people. That's been what we've sent. So I think we could get towards that, kind of thing again. And I think that would be very similar in other countries. But in doing that, you have, one spring, one autumn, or, that kind of season, and a major championships every year. And I think a European Cup with, let's even say, 1,000 competitors in it, is going to be far more viable for the host, the person who's going to step forward and organise this thing, rather than taking a chance, as they are in Italy next year, trying to find a space and find the people who are going to come and support them in between European Championships and a World Cup. It's a tough ask. So I think it gives more confidence to the organiser of the event. We'd have more people looking to host that European Cup. And I think as well, the European Championships would get a slight uptick by not being as pressured. So I think you'd see those bigger teams. And I mean, even 5 or 6 more competitors per team, when you're looking at 30 teams, brings the European Championships from, okay, I think we have 575 this year, with a few major teams missing or reduced strength with COVID. Normally we'd be looking at 750 to 800. We could be looking at 850, 900, and with potentially with new rules and a sub-junior category, over 1,000 competitors at a European Championships, over 1,000 competitors at the European Cup. And I think the revenue would balance itself out quite well in that respect as well.
Yeah, that's an important factor, isn't it? Because obviously there's going to be a hit from the Euros if it's every second year, but if then you're upping the European Cup and
Yeah.
making that a bigger event, then you should see a return there. And do you think that that's one of the reasons that the World Cup is such a bigger event in general, because it's every second year with the World Championships?
I think that massively helps, and you also have to remember, just like within some countries, how much of a task it is to go about getting selected for the national team, making squad training sessions, and so on. Like, I mean, if we think of Canada, like Canada do a great job of sending a large team to the World Championships every second year, but it's a big ask to coordinate that selection process and everything. Whereas for the World Cup, the instructors decide they're going to enter their club, and then they go. There's no burden. It's really straightforward. You know, you fundraise, you do whatever you do, and you get your athletes to the World Cup. It's not that onerous an organisational task. But we certainly see that in Ireland, where clubs that don't, might only have one competitor engaging at the national team level might send 7 or 8 competitors to a World Cup, because it's a club building experience. That's what it's there for. And I think the European Cup can have that same thing. And that's where I think the European Cup and the European Championships fill a very different role. So what I would be saying myself is, let's have a major club event once a year and a major national team event once a year for Europe. And then the following year, you've got a major club event and a major national team event. So from a development point of view, we can have almost like a squad that we're hoping would be the national team in a year or two, who can go to a European Cup that's on a hugely, on a really high level, organisationally and standard of competitor-wise, and can go to a World Cup on the other year. It might be more of an expense, especially if it's outside of Europe, but they can target it. It can be something that a development squad can do. And I know the likes of Norway would have 4 regional development squads. I know the same kind of thing exists in other countries, where if you have a squad that exists just below your national team that you can support and resource and get to these major, European or world events, like, it's a great way to stepping stone people through and keep them really active at a very high level of competition. And then you've got the people who, for me, I'm thinking in terms of, what about our veterans? Because the veterans, really, they can slot into the European Cup, but if it's very pressured in terms of where it fits, maybe the veteran categories could be bigger if the European Cup got more of a highlight, more space. And, it's a great opportunity for the veterans to kind of step out and get on the floor. And it's a lot of instructors kind of just step back on the floor for their, come on, we'll give it a go kind of a thing. So I think there's potential there as well. But
yeah, it does make sense, especially because I was thinking of maybe the people who are looking to make that step through. Maybe people are going from junior to senior, and that cup experience is massive, because obviously there's only a certain amount of selections on European squad for the championships. So people who are looking to make that transition as well, it is an important event, and you want to be testing yourself against those people that are going to be there to stake your claim. So a lot of time we don't see some of the top names and the top people in the divisions at the European Cup. So I think it is something that needs to be addressed to kind of improve it. Off the top of my head, I think it's a fantastic idea, and there's the downside doesn't seem to be that obvious and that glaring to when you think about it. But I'm sure there'll be some ideas that will prop up.
There are definitely some downsides that'll emerge. So I mean, there's, even just from the point of view of, the European Championships is at a particular level of organisation every year, and your national team, as you said right at the beginning, has that opportunity to participate in an event that is at a particular level of organisation and challenge, and it includes the team events, includes special and power. And I mean, that's one of the things that maybe you miss by not having a Euros every year, that you don't get out as a team to perform team pattern or to spar as a team. You might miss out on those special power pre-arranged because they're not in the more local events. So there's potentially something there, and that's where you'd have to look at the European Cup filling some of the gap there. But I think that's definitely one of the potential downsides. Like, you just have to acknowledge that any change that you would make has some potential downsides to it. But from that point of view, one of the other proposals we had was the idea of ranking events. And the idea of the ranking events is, well, again, all taken into consideration, if you have a European Championships now every second year, the rankings that you have from the previous European Championships become less relevant. So in the same way as the World Championship rankings, they so rarely come into effect. because
It's
2
even like
years
the Euros
after.
this year. That's on next week.
Exactly, because it's been 2
because
years
of
since
these
the last
things.
Euros. The rankings
Yeah.
are almost irrelevant because you're looking at the first and second, or maybe in the future for a second, third from previous events being ranked. If the event was 6 months or a year ago, fair enough. And actually, there's another argument for every second year European Championships, because we often have them 6 months apart because the World Championships move season.
Yeah.
Nightmare. But the goal would be that, if you have a ranking from the European Championships, yes, that contributes going forwards, but that you'd have a number of other events, including the European Cup, that would contribute to your ranking as you go along. So your seeding then when you arrive at the next European Championships isn't only determined by the first place or second place in the last one, but how you've participated in other events along the way. And this is really important, I think, as well for breakthrough competitors. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, you could be the unlucky one who spars the number one seed. But if you're ranking, it's likely that the ones who are well placed and likely to beat the number one seed or the number two seed don't face them in the first round. So,
Yeah. And that's always an issue, isn't it? Like
is.
I see it this year, in particular with the minus 62 euros.
Female. Yeah.
There's one side of that division that is absolutely stacked.
Yeah, for sure.
And a lot of previous medalists are all on one side. So I think that is something that needs to be addressed. That is a good idea. And of course, it's going to help as well with national team selection, because for some countries, the national team selection is something that is very, very competitive.
Yeah,
so
sure.
it'll also help to kind of stabilize that, get people out there competing more. But in terms of the idea of how it will work, are you thinking at a select number of events?
Yeah.
Certain events that would be ranked? Are you thinking things like the Open Dutch and maybe the Roma Open and things like that?
Well, straight up, the first thing I would be thinking is that in order to be ranked, it would have to run at a European Championship standard of. So in other words, would have to run the full ITF rules for sparring. In other words, the 2 by 2 minute rounds. 1 2 minute round, mishmashed, different things couldn't apply for a ranking event. Now, you might allow for double elimination or repechage or something like that if you felt that was a good thing to go, but there should be a full pyramid that gets to the final. So in other words, you should definitely have those full match experience. So not based on a 3 minute round, a 2 minute pool. You should be ranked based on the competition that you're going to be competing in. So that's the first thing. The second thing is you would need to have it on sport data and electronically scored, for example. So you want to make sure that there's no we think so and so won that division. Everything would have to be through a tracked ranking system, automated and online. So that's a second portion of it. I think as well, and that applies obviously for pattern as well. We would be looking for the 2 designated pattern for black belt rather than say 1 designated or 1 optional pattern, that kind of thing. But I think that the really important thing with that is that you would need to have a contract with between the AETF and the host of the tournaments. There may well be a beneficial financial relationship in there as well, in that it may be that it's a licensed event. It may be that there's a cost per participant that goes to the ATF or whatever it happens to be for the ranking. But there should be a benefit each way, because, of course, if it's a known ranking event, it should attract the competitors who want to compete at the European Championships, and it should strengthen the black belt divisions. So you'd be hoping to see some degree of reciprocity there. But you wouldn't want to necessarily have 12 ranking events a year. It might be that there's 4 or something like that. And then the ranking might be based on your best 4 or 5 across the period. So it's not saying to people that you have to be at 8 or 10 events over 2 years. It might be saying, look, it's your best 4 over the period, and it includes the European Cup or something along those lines. So you might have.
Would you be looking at European Cup and European Championships being as higher kind of ranking points, or equal?
No, I think they'd have to be higher. Like, I mean, in the end, the most significant performance that you would have over the period would have to be the European Championships before. So if you're coming out as a gold, silver, bronze medalist from the European Championships, that has to carry more weight than winning, let's call it the Open Dutch, and the Open Dutch is in a different format, but let's say it's the Open Dutch. It has to carry more weight than that. It just has to. But the idea being, of course, that the ranking influences your seeding into the next European Championships. So it's just giving enough of an incentive to people. It's like everyone wants to go and compete anyway. It's just, where do you compete? Because as a competitor, And as a coach trying to pick events for your competitors, you're trying to pick events where you don't go into the preparation and all the rest of it and then arrive there and, oh, your weight division doesn't exist, you're being bumped to this weight division, there's only 3 people in it and one of them, isn't great. That's not really what you're looking for when or you arrive there and it's like, oh, but you're in a 7x7 meter ring, we're sparring a 2-minute round in a pool. We're calling you out, Johan. Okay, that was we knew what we were getting into. But this is a running joke, myself, Johan, and Tim Cool. So the thing is, there are people who love doing 7x7 rings in their championships. That's okay, as long as you know what you're getting into. But what I would be suggesting is, if it's for a ranking event, it has to have the full size ring, it has to have the normal scoring, it has to have the normal times and rounds. Otherwise, it's not actually the same sport. Would be my contention.
Yeah. No, I have to agree. But it was like that for a long time as well. I know some of the rules were different, but there was almost a unwritten rule that, okay, before the Euros or the Worlds or a big event, let's all gather at the Viking Cup and get ready and test ourselves. And I know Poland used it as a selection tournament for a long time, and some other countries
certainly had weight in selection.
Yeah, so like things like that, if we could get that together, I think that was brilliant for the competition in ITF and getting everybody together more than once a year and testing your skills. And I think it increases, like a rising tide lifts all boats, and that's the idea here. It should increase the level across the board.
And being very selfish from a European point of view, it's saying, well, if we want to stand out against what the rest of the world has to offer, we need to be able to, coordinate and organise our best to sharpen off of each other all year round to ensure that, our teams are as strong as they possibly can be, going into the World Championships and World Cup. And I think that is something that potentially allows us to do that.
I think this actually as well will increase the level of the tournaments, because now organisers will want to be involved in those tournaments, and they'll push the organisation and make the venue a little more representative to what it's like at a European Cup, or like we've seen it, for example, at our own Irish Cup this year. The facility and the setup was fantastic, and we've seen that in our last video we did on Fight Chat Friday. But I think that will push people to, as an incentive, to take those extra steps to push it on, which is great for the sport as well as a spectacle.
But exactly that,
Taekwondo.
And as we've been talking about, once you've got the overall presentation looking good, your coordination, your timing, your organizational skills are better, it makes for a better event for live streaming, for tying in that element of it, the presentation of maybe, all the finals get live streamed from each of these events or something along those lines, where maybe all of the finals go to a particular centre square or whatever, which is live streamed, so everybody around, Europe, around the world can actually see the events, and it looks good, and it's got all of the fighters highlighted and with the ranking, and the more data like that, the more we can create a spectator experience and a supporter experience out of it as well. Because letting the people go out there and feature and highlight themselves at tournament after tournament will let them build a name at home. It lets them expose their sponsors, and we're hoping that it has that kind of effect. And then if you have a Grand Prix series, potentially you can generate sponsors for the Grand Prix series as well. That works in terms of the host and the AETF, where they're getting their branding in the live streaming, in the in the setup of the arenas and venues, and it's not just once every second year or once a year, but it's on 4 or 5 events a year. So I think that adds better exposure to potential sponsors as well.
Are you looking at this Grand Prix as being a championship within itself, or is it just with a focus to ranking points for Euros? As in, if you win most of the events in the Grand Prix, do you then get some sort of a championship title because of that, or is it just separately
effectively,
they get ranking points?
Effectively, it can run parallel as a league. So it might be a 2-year league, or it could be a on that basis where you have your best 4 or 5 results. So maybe you discount the Euros and the European Cup from that placing, so they go into your ranking points. But if you have your Grand Prix ranking, and at the end of every 2-year period, there's an award for, as you said, your Grand Prix finish or whatever it happens to be. I think that gets quite interesting. And then there's also the question of, does it overlap? So, in other words, so you have this 2-year period, but then you have the next 2-year period which overlaps, so that effectively every year you're crowning a Grand Prix winner, but but based on the previous 2 years of ranking events. So like a big thing for me is,
logistically as well, that might be a bit tricky, but
It's only tracking it online. But for me, the issue is just that I wouldn't want to create a Grand Prix series where it's kind of telling people, look, you have to be able to afford all of these trips, or it's a pay to play. So I wouldn't be interested in a kind of a pay to play kind of thing. Like, a person should be able to, let's say, go to 2 events a year, or 1 event 1 year, 2 events the other year, as well as the European Cup and European Championships, and get a ranking. That's solid. But if it suits you, and if you're really competitive and you want to travel and you want to get to 2 and 3 events a year, it should be a point where there's a diminishing return either, where it's like, okay, I did all 4 events and I was just able to pay more and travel more. That shouldn't result in you automatically winning because you've more points than everybody. It should be based off of your best X number of events, so that would be
I think using it as the ranking points is definitely the way to go with it.
Yeah.
But then the question is, do you think that leads to a pathway of linking into World Championships, as in rankings from Europeans affecting Worlds?
Potentially, or you extend the Grand Prix system worldwide, and you basically have not just the European events, but as you set a classification of event or requirements for event, whether it's number of competitors, the setup of the event, obviously, and the running according to ITF rules, and you basically have a licensing agreement with each of the events that run it, or the countries that run it, in order to. But you'd want to be quite careful. You don't necessarily want to have a European Grand Prix and simultaneously, and on top of that, a World Grand Prix. You have to be a bit careful with that. There's only so many tournaments that people can attend, and again, you have the issue. They're not going to be peak events. Like, people are still going to have to use those as preparation events for the big events as well, like for the European Championships, the World Championships. So there's a balance in it.
Yeah, it's a good idea. Definitely moving forward on the right track.
So jumping on from there, looking at a few things that are potentially coming down the line in terms of rule changes. And again, while a lot of these ideas may well have originated with individuals in different countries, were advanced through the various channels and questionnaires and surveys that were done by the coaches committee, the athletes committee, the tournament umpire committee at various events. However they've come to be as ideas, it's well worth discussing what this might mean for us. So the proposal has come forward around adding an additional weight category to each of the divisions. So, and that's particularly within sparring. Obviously, that it doesn't go into patterns. But what do you think of the idea of having an extra weight category? And for the purpose of discussing this, we're not talking about necessarily going much beyond in the hyperweight. It's not adding to the number of categories at the top end. This is really more subdividing and adding or reducing the gaps between the weight categories as they currently stand. Lower and upper end staying more or less the same.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because and I think that idea of the lower and upper end is an important discussion point, because on one hand you have the Euros next week, for example, where those divisions are probably the lightest, and for example the senior female hyperweight doesn't have any competitors.
Yeah.
So that's one issue. And then the second issue is, like, for example, currently at plus 85, like, most of the bigger guys will be in around that 80 mark. So you kind of have them around the 80 to 85 up towards the 90 mark. But then you have guys who are like 100 plus, who are literally natural hyperweights. So that in itself is a bit of an issue as well. So I think that's something that has to be looked at, and getting the balance right, because you don't want a division that has only like 5 competitors at the European Championships, but then at the same time you want them to be able to balance out in terms of the difference in competitors when you look at the other divisions. If there's only 5 kilos, 6 kilos between all the other divisions, and then you have somebody who's 90 kilos having to compete against somebody who's 120, there is a talking point there for sure. But in terms of the idea of including another one, I think it's very good, because it will allow people to not focus so much on big drastic weight cuts. And I think for our sport, weight is not as important as people think. Now, I know I just made a comment of 90 to 120, but that is a big difference.
Yeah.
But when we're talking maybe like 75 kilos to 80 kilos, that's not a big a difference. And then people are making big, huge cuts to come down and maybe skip a division in times. So I think that it allows people to get more people into divisions as well. Sometimes people are making big weight cuts to avoid teammates. But then having an extra division, you get extra people in the divisions from your country, etc. So I think overall it's a positive step, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, there's one of the things that often happens with, because it's an individual sport, and we actually see this across a lot of individual sports, certainly in Ireland, I'm sure it happens worldwide. If there's only a certain pool who are really, really eligible for selection at a particular weight class, either someone moves up or they just stop trying, or they move down or they stop trying. And that's something that you can lose a lot of people out of competition simply because there isn't a spot for them to go to. And so we always find this weird catch-22 where it's like, it would be really healthy for the sport if we had, let's say, 8 people competing for the minus 78 slot in Ireland. So then the 2 that you actually select are definitely the best 2 of the 8 that you send. But what happens is maybe one year you get 8, and the following year you have 6, and the following year you have 4. And, if there isn't any changeover, that drop-off happens even quicker. So it might be the first tournament you have 8, the next tournament in the same year you have 6, and the next tournament you have 4, and the following year there's 2 or 3 people who turn up every time, and the category ends up being merged with the next one above. So, that's not ideal. So it is one of those things where it can be quite challenging to strike the balance right. But in terms of preserving the overall number competing at a senior level, I think in particular at senior level, it's great to have that extra category. And I massively agree with you in terms of the weight cuts. Like, if it was a smaller weight jump when you've decided you're going up a category, you might do it a year earlier rather than making that last drastic weight cut to get down to your familiar category before you go up. And even but I do think on the plus side, it's hard to know whether, if you had a heavier plus division, like, so let's say at the males, let's say it's 85 and you have also a 92 or something, would that encourage more people to enter both divisions, the 92 and the plus 92? Or would it mean that you just split the existing pool into 2 smaller pools? It's hard to know what would happen and what would happen if you stuck with it long term. Because, again, when the ITF went from 5 to 6 weight categories in each of the divisions, none of them really got smaller. More people came along to the tournaments. The tournaments got bigger, and actually the divisions got bigger as well. Generally speaking, across the board, the divisions got bigger. This would be a very interesting stepping stone experiment to see, look, if we have 7 divisions, does the tournament get, 18% bigger as we add that extra division in there? And do all of the divisions get smaller, or actually do all the divisions stay the same size and potentially grow as, the bigger biases are taken out? You'll often see it, like, particularly in the males, like, 57's reluctant to go to 63 or 63 to 70 in particular, where the height difference or the height advantage
is important.
Can be a big thing. But, like, those super tall people don't last in the 63s or 70. They tend to move up. But, there's a new one every year coming through from junior, and they just haven't grown into themselves yet. And all of a sudden you've got this 6'2", 6'3", 63 kilo fighter who can be quite challenging. But then a year later they're 70, and a year later they're 78. It's that kind of thing.
We should go on to hip height and then have a light and heavy division. So hip height rather, and then I wouldn't be out with all the big guys all the time. That would be great.
The insane
big long legs.
Yeah.
No, but I think if you look at the gap between, let's take senior males for example, what's your ideal gap in terms of kilo? Are you looking at like 5 kilo, 6 kilo, that kind of range? Yeah,
very much that. I mean, like, I think that's kind of about right. If we think of that 5-6 kilo mark, I think it's enough that, like, let's just say you were 63 kilos and you find yourself walking around 3 months after competition, and you're training well, but you're weighing 69, 70 kilos. A 7 kilo drop to 63 is, that's a considered bit of work. Like, and most of the 63s will do that. That's kind of what they're going to do over time. They're going to work their way down.
Their body weight as well, you see, because they're smaller people.
Yeah, it's a bigger percentage body weight for sure. But if they could go to, let's say, instead of going from 63 to 70, if they could go from 63 to 67, well, that's something to you definitely consider, because that's a big or 68, whatever it happens to be. Like, even 1 kilo of a difference would make a difference there. But I think it just changes the decision point. And in particular, like, from a national team perspective, I think most of us would go, look, you can drop a division, but you can't drop 2. is a very simple thing to state, and that would have a massive impact on people's general health and the mentality around weight. You know, it's just like, look, you turn up the squad training session, you can drop one division from there, you can't drop two. And like, obviously there's a lot more to it than that. We can really look into people's, you know, body composition, you know, where they're at, the whole lot of it. But as a very simple thing, from anything, you know, those weights up, a 5 kilo drop is 10% of body weight. For, you know, at the worst it's probably less. And, you know, straight away you're ruling out people doing these, like, you know, 68, 69 down to 57 kind of drops. You know, that's just like, no, you're not doing that. You're bypassing 63 and you're bypassing 69, for example. It's like, no, you're not doing that. I think that would be good.
The next thing then that comes to mind is we kind of touched on the heavier end of the scale, but would you be looking to include that extra division somewhere to balance out the most common weight in each division? For example, most senior males probably hovering between the 70 to 80 kilo mark on average for like our global population. So would you be kind of looking to split that kind of side of it up more and expand either side?
Well, there is that thing, isn't it, that like realistically, you know, human heights and weights exist on a bell curve. Like there's going to be extremes on the low and high side, and that's influenced by as such ethnicity, geography, all that kind of thing. So you will see different averages depending on the population. But like, is it worth having some closer weight divisions around the middle and a little bit of a bigger spread at the end? Potentially. It's a little bit more worrying on the light end than the heavy end. But there is a case to be made for maybe not having the splits as uniform. So like you might go from 57 to 63 to 69 to like 74 to 78, 79 to 84. You know, you might have like 4 or 5 kilo gaps in the middle. Honestly, like that was numbers off the top of my head, but it was basically the idea that, look, you've got 6 kilos maybe in the first two, and then it drops to 5 or 4 for 2 or 3, and then it might increase to 6 or 7 or 8 again at the tail end. And that might just kind of allow for the fact that while there's a bell curve, the bell curve isn't like completely stacked in the middle. It's not exactly right. So you're not going to go far on the light end. Like you're not going to have people so ridiculous, all those guys wandering around there at 45 kilos at such a disadvantage. Like those people more or less statistically don't exist, versus all those guys walking around at 100 kilos. Like they're just microweights in powerlifting. Like those people exist. You know, they're out there. They're like we're a rugby team. Like the reality is that like most of them are going to be 90 kilos plus. Like the whole team is. They all exist on our extreme end of the bell curve. It's just that for Taekwondo, we kind of fall a bit closer to the normal human population kind of averages, where 75 kilos is kind of taken as the elevator weight of a human being kind of thing. So it's like I do think there would be something to said for that, with an uneven weight distribution across the whole thing, to allow for a bit more of a like a finer graduation of weight in the middle and maybe a chunkier graduation at the end. I think that's a pretty cool idea. Yeah. So there's also the potential for a small change in terms of small but very significant change in terms of the age categories, because it's been put forward for ages and ages with very good reason that, like, if you can be in a tournament at 14 and you can still be junior at 18, that is effectively almost a 5-year age gap, which for junior is enormous. And it doesn't matter as much if you're a 45 kilo female or a 50 kilo male, because you probably won't have many 17 and 18 year old 50 kilo males. But it matters an awful lot if you are, like, let's take my son Ryan, who's 70 kilos and 15, right, and 6'2". But the thing is, like, if he goes into his first championships at 15 years of age, and he's, let's say, by then 74, 75 kilos or something, and he's in minus 75, most of those guys are 17 and 18. They have a couple of years of experience and like physical mass, and you know, they're built a bit differently. So there's always been a little bit of an issue around that, and so lots of proposals were put forward around how you might change the age groups, and it gets a little bit more complicated when you can't use the day of the competition so much, because that changes. It's not in a fixed date every year. So because the date of the competition moves, you kind of have to use the year of the competition and the year of birth. So the idea is effectively that you would have like 12, 13, 14 and 15, 16, 17 as the junior bracket. So 2 separate brackets of ages. Now, when you look at how that would work out, in reality, it's probably much more like 13, 14, 15 and 16, 17, 18 in terms of the qualifying ages. But it's 2 3-year bans. That's pretty impactful.
Yeah, I think, well, first thing that comes to mind is if you're going to use that, then your idea of the cups will probably interlink with it much better, because you have that interplay there. Where is it same for
there's an under 14
European
at the
Cup?
cup. Yeah.
But then as well, at the same time, does it give people the opportunity to go around potentially as 12 years old saying they're world champion? Maybe that's not the best thing either, but
it does. I wouldn't be a huge fan of that either. See, and again, the first question jumps to mind as well. Like in Ireland, it's different in every country. You can't get a black belt with us until you're 13.
Yeah.
And 13 is almost rare. Like most of them are 13 and a half, 14 at the minimum. So they might qualify for a year in that younger division. We will not have any second degrees unless someone graded black belt at 13 and was pushed hard to go for second degree at 15, but still, because of the entry requirements, qualified as under 14.
Yeah, because like you can see the patterns division that's proposed, there's even first, second and third degree for that 12 to 14.
Yeah,
like that's another reason. Like you probably have one person in that division. Like usually
that'll seem alien to us. Poland don't have that. Scandinavia don't have that. Like there are a lot of countries where it's like, well, we just won't be in there, and that will affect the placings of the overall countries. Look, it's just a thing. I think it was needed, but I don't know that it was needed here. My personal take on that one was, I absolutely think there should be a split there, but potentially the split was to go 15 to 17, go to the European and World Championships, and the other ones are filtered out to the Cup. I don't think they need to be in the European or World Championships. But you keep the 3 people per category and so on, and adding the extra weight divisions and all that kind of thing would actually balance the number of people. I don't think you'd lose out too much by taking out the 14-year-olds. So if you were to take out the 14-year-olds, say again?
It is a tricky one because like people do get a lot of valuable experience then as well.
They do.
When they're younger.
And that has to be replaced elsewhere.
From my own personal experience, first Euros at 14, last first round, second Euros, same thing. And then as I was 17, hitting 18, I won the whole division straight off. So I think that has a lot to do with it as well. That development and that experience you gain is very, very important. And if that is the case, then you probably will have to prioritize the likes of the cups way more. Now,
let's say this goes through and this is the change. Cool. Okay, we have some things to think about. Some of the concerns that, in particular that I would have is like, and I think might actually be alleviated by our organisational differences in Ireland. Like, I think, even when you start at 14, competition fatigue is real. Like, by 24, you could have 10 European Championships, 5 World Championships, and 5 World Cups, as well as I don't know how many European Cups, depending on how they're organised. Like, even if you only did the major championships, you've got 15 championship campaigns done by the time you're 24. Like, that brings with it a certain amount of, can I do this another year, or do I want to do this another year?
I think more people are actually maybe retiring, if that's the correct word, at that late 20s now. If you take World Championships 2019 in Germany, most of the people who won those divisions were under the age of 24. And there wasn't that many people who were in the maybe 30 range, where when I only seen a picture recently on Facebook of a Polish team who was tagged from years ago, and I was like, a lot of those guys were solid men, and they were kind of like in their late 20s, well developed, where now you see a lot of younger guys. So that is an interesting take, which is something that has been different in recent years, and I think it's probably going to follow that trend as well. So that is something to note, I suppose, for if you want to have that.
I think it just throws back on us as national teams and and nations in general in terms of how you organise. Like, what way would you play that? How do you work with that? And as I said, there's a consideration where yes, getting experience early can be quite good, but where you get that experience, how much expense, cost, time investment is required to get that experience also becomes a thing. you're like, it may create the worry that, well, if you don't get in there at 13, 14 years of age, by the time it goes to sparring at 15 years of age or whatever it happens to be at the pre-junior level, or at the junior level, there's people who've had 2 European Championships already or 3 European Championships already behind you. Now, where it might have less of an impact is if the European Championships is every second year, because you would probably only have 1 campaign in pre-junior and 1 campaign or 2 campaigns in junior before going to senior. So the number of European Championship campaigns that each person has might be a little bit less. But again, you might have had a World Championships in between, you know. So yes, there's a great experience, and we know how powerful that experience can be, in particular with the juniors gaining confidence in the environment. I think there's a huge role to be played in the cups. I'm torn on it. Because for me, we need to not have that huge 14 to 18 split. I don't think that's great. I think even taking the 14-year-olds out of that would be massive. However, I don't know if I want to have that younger split of, let's have 3 whole years of people who could be as young as 12 going to European Championships and the World Championships. I think there's a big question in there. But
what do you think of the idea of maybe like an under 20 division?
An under 20, under 21, something along those lines, I think would have been a good call for a European Cup, World Cup. I don't think it's needed necessarily, but for the reason that you just stated, like how many of the younger people are actually winning Euros and Worlds.
Yeah.
But I think at a European Cup or World Cup level, I think it could be quite good. And the reason I think that is, we are eliminating so many people when they go to senior or whatever. It very quickly, the pool of competitors within the country narrows down to the ones who are selected or likely to be selected, and the competition narrows quite quickly. And then after a number of years, life takes its course and those people are like weeded out, and you're struggling, you're looking all the time to the new juniors to fill the team. Whereas I think an under 21 side of things would allow people who've come through from junior, who don't immediately break through, to have a focus in terms of major international competition. I think that would be a very interesting one to have at a European Cup or at a World Cup level.
The prestige then is a factor, isn't it? It's like people who may be 20 years old and they're winning that division, they're thinking, okay, I actually feel that I could take the senior division as well. So
yeah,
it's that kind of a thing as well, isn't it? It's like,
I don't think you could do it I think if you did it within the same championships, it doesn't work quite so well. Like, I think where it's worked well in Ireland is we have that 14 and 15 years black belt division for development, and it allows people to opt out of national selection to go into a developmental pool, and it works both ways. So you're not in the shark tank, right? You're taking yourself out of the shark tank to give yourself a good level of competition that's more appropriate to where you're at. And I think that's where it might work at an under 21 level. It's like, well, hey, if you think you can take out that whole senior black belt division, go for it, get in there. But if we take it, for example, that there's 140 people who enter the -70 senior male black belt sparring at the World Cup, right? How many of those 140 seriously think they can win that division?
Yeah.
What you might end up with is something like 60 people go into that division, and the other 80 go, or let's say, bad example, because there's probably only like 20 or 30 of them who are under 21. But let's say of those under 21s, there's X amount of them who go, well, I'm not going to win that division, and then they jump into the other one. I think that's where it has some validity. They might not be huge divisions simply because people move through those age groups quicker. But equally, if those divisions existed, perhaps people who were in that age category were so, all right, I'll tackle that, I'll give that a go. But yeah, I like that suggestion.
Yeah, it might be something to look at. I know there's some suggestions as well on the spec tech and power side of things. Yeah,
for sure. So in terms of special technique and power, there's a few people, and I'm going to give a shout out to my buddy Brendan Dugan. He's been very vocal among the people who've been looking for this. But trying to have the number of techniques for male and female standardized at 5. So in other words, no reason why the females can't do the same jumps as the men. There's no, the heights or their number of boards might differ, but the ability to deliver the technique, is there. So
I've never heard a female being happy about that. They say, oh, we get to do a few less. It's always, how come we can't do what the guys are doing? So I think that's a great idea. Just
asking the question, why do the guys do more than we do? And as an instructor, you go, And I mean, it's always been a trick, because for me, I don't stop my classes and go, okay girls, sit down, we're going to continue to the boys techniques now. Like, that's never a thing that has ever happened. So it's a case of, okay, we're doing jumping reverse turning kick now. Everybody does jumping reverse turning kick, because
of course.
why not?
Why not?
Equally, when it comes to the the grading syllabus, and we're looking at board breaking or whatever, it's like, well, the girls are going to punch a board. Like, we just had a competition for our juniors last night. We had 30 juniors do breaking, special technique and pattern, and they all broke all of the techniques. It's like, now, not 5, because these are 6, 7 and 8 year olds, but they did 3 techniques for power and they did 2 techniques for special technique. And
nice.
It was also mixed, like it was male female, but it wasn't direct elimination. But we can go into that another day. But the point of it was, yeah, there was no question around, you're a boy, you're a girl, so you go to that line, you go to this line. It was just a case of, well, look, let's see what you can do. And really, that was the point of it, and they had a great time. But in this case, there's one other change, which I think is really significant, which is the idea that, for power at least, you can go in any order. You can select your own order to tackle the techniques. But if you don't break your first one, you're eliminated from the event. And I have very mixed feelings on that one. I get it. I get it. Like, there's so many times when a person goes through all 5 techniques, fails all 5, and it's like, well, you really weren't prepared for this event, were you? I have a different solution in my mind for it, but that's besides the point. I think here, what's really sinking into me is that feeling of, you've prepared, you're going there, that is your event. So I'm going to do power breaking, that's what I'm doing. I'm traveling from, let's say, Uruguay to Spain to compete in, or to Tampere in Finland to compete in the World Championships. And I feel the one that breaks most consistently for training, or for me in training, is my 3-board turning kick. Like, that's locked in. I feel pretty good about that. But I'm aware that if I miss it, I'm done. That's my trip over. I have one kick that will take less than a second to perform, and I'm done. And that, for me, that additional pressure, knowing that that's it, that's your one and only shot, that, you're out of it, no matter how many boards you might have broken, you're done, that weighs with me. I don't love that.
Yeah, especially when we just spoke about the idea of keeping people in the sport longer.
Yeah.
I think that if you go there, you miss that and you're out, and you don't even get to attempt the other ones. That is a problem. Whereas you might miss your first one, which maybe, for example, your turning kick is a good one, but for some reason it doesn't go.
Yeah.
But then what if you break all the other 4? That's still a good experience to take from, knowing that, okay, usually my turning kick is quite solid. There was something that went wrong for me on the day.
Yeah.
But now I have the other 4 are locked in, and now there's something for me tangible to kind of go work on and improve for the future. It's like, right, that was my result. Now let's go and improve on that. Whereas you don't really get that experience of using one technique if it's make or break.
For sure.
Pardon the pun.
Yeah. It's a good one, actually. But but leaving that aside, I think that's one of the, like, it's not the biggest detail in this. I think the addition of the 2 extra breaks for a female and the 2 extra jumps for female, I think that's massive. I think it's a really, really good experiment to take, to try that out. I think it would probably take a little bit of time to figure out what the board should be set at and what the height should be and whether those work across the board, junior and senior. But, like, I'm really excited to see how that goes, and to see, that little bit of extra differentiation as well. Like, so often the female ones, particularly special technique, so I've spent a lot of time at the side of the ring in special technique, where it's, okay, and these 6, 7 ladies went clear, hit all 3 techniques in there, now we have to get into the playoffs. And really the playoffs, refocus that thing, the playoffs come down to, okay, let's see who's here. Alright, it's Anna Dubrovska. Okay, turning kick, she'll be very, very happy. It's Ekaterina. Oh, she'll be very happy if it goes to Nopi Chagi. Oh, it's Louise. She wants it to be flying sidekick. And, it comes down to, almost that lottery of which technique is going to come out and how does that suit the other competitors there. Where having the 5 allows for a bit more differentiation at the first take. That initial run through of the 5 techniques, we should have more point scoring. We should have a clearer number of people at the top. Hopefully we're seeing people through clear rounds and we're getting into tiebreakers again, but at the same time there's more chance to show what you can do first.
Yeah, I think you should bring it like the slam dunk contest in the NBA, where if it's a tiebreaker, you have to come up with a special technique, a special technique.
A special tech, like bring it back to the way old school days of like, you stand there and you stand there and you stand there and I'm going to bounce off of you that wall and that would be good.
No, but some good ideas, and I think that if anybody is interested in this side of things, check out our video with the Irish Cup review from last week. Adrian shared some very good ideas about what he thinks might be a solution to make special technique and power more engaging and also more exciting as well.
So folks, that will be our chat for this week. I'll be going to the European Championships to enjoy, hopefully, coaching at ringside of the major championships for the first time in quite a while. Definitely be bringing the iPad with me and record as much video as I can and all that in the spare moments. And it'll be great to have some fresh competition to discuss, review and get our teeth into over the next couple of weeks. So until next Friday, we will see you very, very soon. Bye now.
See you in the next one.